everyone, my name is Rama Takintola and I'm excited to introduce our speaker for today, Amanda Savluchinske. Amanda would be given a talk titled What If You Became an Open Source Software Contributor? Amanda is an engineering manager at Vinta Software. She has a background in business and software engineering. She has been a speaker at conferences such as DjangoCon US, Europe, and Python Brazil, where she gave technical topics but loves discussing the overlap and challenges around technical and non-technical domains. Her current goal is to be less chronically online and touch grass from time to time. I'm so excited to listen to Amanda's talk today, and I hope you all are too. Join me as I welcome Amanda Savluchinske.
Everyone, my name is Amanda Savluchinske, and today I would like to present my talk called What If You Became an Open Source Contributor in 2025? So before we get into the fun stuff, I just wanted to give some context about why I decided to talk about this. For several years, even though I have given, talks in some community events, have been a part of open source communities like this one, and have come into contact with great people in general within the community, I couldn't shake one thought out of my head that whatever I put out there in terms of code, people would forever judge me for it. And this is something that put me off contributing for several years. I've been working in tech since 2017 and worked with Python and JavaScript professionally for around 5 of those years. And the first time I ever contributed to big deal open source was in 2025. Of course, I had contributed to smaller open source projects before, like some that were started by the company I work for, but nothing that had dozens or hundreds or even thousands of contributors working on it. So this talk goes to people in similar situations, because it doesn't matter if you have several years of experience or if you're just starting out, open source has a spot saved up for you. There's a second motivation behind the making of this talk, and it's why it's important for communities to care about sustainability of open source. And this is what I wanted to cover to ensure that everybody's on the same page. There's research about how much of the open source resource is worth, and it was estimated at almost $9 trillion. And it is also known that around 90% of companies use this type of resource. This is a lot of businesses depending on technology that's really available out there. If you look at the numbers of how much is invested back into open source, you might be surprised though. When we talk about personal contributions, a Stack Overflow research indicated that only 1 in 4 people who code professionally actually spends time contributing to open source outside work hours. As for companies, it's estimated that they only contribute around $7.7 billion annually to open source. And most of that, around 86%, is through employee labor. So they basically allow their employees to work on open source during working hours. If you consider the importance of open source and the impact it has in global economy, this information is quite shocking. At least it was to me. And I think we should all be concerned about open source, its maintenance, and also its longevity. There's a lot of risks bound to the fact that open source is mainly run by volunteers. Of course, there are very popular open source projects with organizations backing them up, be it public or private. And there are quite a lot that don't have this type of support, though. When we analyze this scenario, we see that there are instances where maintainers can get burnt out and give up on projects. And, the resources that are usually available for smaller projects are fewer. And of course, production projects that are using that resource may not benefit from things like SLAs for solving high severity issues, for instance. So I guess I made my point on the relevance of keeping open source going. So let's go back to some of the reasons why some of you may be cautious of starting your contribution journeys. The first one is the knowledge barrier. Gathering context about a new code base can be challenging, and the level of documentation available in open source projects varies dramatically. It can be difficult to break the knowledge barrier at first, especially if you're not super experienced. But you will find that there are resources available to help you better understand code bases. The second one is imposter syndrome. I guess this term was trendy a couple of years ago, but it reflects a phenomenon that most people have lived throughout their careers, that they're not good enough or that they will fail. And for most humans, it's pretty much guaranteed that we'll feel insecure at several points in our lives. But that's not something that we can let take control of our decisions. If you're giving up on something you really want before even trying, try to pause, reflect, and give it a chance, because you'll see that most of it is in your own head. The third one is fear of external judgment. And this is a totally natural feeling. In fact, it's a fact that there are some humans out there who can be not so nice about others. However, the open source community, and especially Python's open source community, is extremely welcoming with its contributors. I've never met anybody within these years of interacting with the community that was hostile, or that looked down on others, or that gave any reasons not to trust that they would be kind in their interactions, especially when we consider that open source is mainly run by unpaid volunteers. Now that I think that I sold my point on why these common fears should be put aside so that you can focus on the practical things, let's talk a little bit about how to start your contribution journey. There are several ways to start contributing. There's no need for us to bureaucratize things too much, nor is there a right way to start. However, there are some paths that you can take to make things easier if you're just starting, or if you're more of a self-taught person, you can go through other routes. The first path that I wanted to call out is through mentorship programs, and I guess one of the most famous ones is Google Summer of Code. Google Summer of Code is an online program that focuses on bringing more people into open source development. And the way that the program is structured is through a 12-week period in which people can get mentored to work on open source projects. There are a multitude of organizations that sign up to have their projects worked on through this program. So there's no shortage of different languages in which one can start their contribution journey with. To participate in this program, you must apply through their website when there's an open cohort and go through a selection process. It's also only open to university students or recent college grads. The other one that I wanted to cover is Django Space. This is an open to all program that offers to mentor people throughout an 8-week period, in which folks are divided into teams that contribute to 3 different Django projects. And I've been a part of this program myself, and can say that it's very rewarding and structured. The way it works is also through cohorts, and there's also a selection process for participating. So not only do you get to contribute to major open source projects, but you also get access to a great community, exclusive talks and workshops, and so on. There are a lot of open source mentorship programs that I could cover here, but we could spend a whole day covering all of them, and I only have 20 minutes for everything. So here's a more comprehensive list that contains several alternatives to the programs mentioned above. So, like, while there are mentorship programs for people who appreciate more structure, I don't think they're actually the most popular path. Open source is very open. So you can just open GitHub and find an interesting project to work on. However, choosing can be at times harder than just being assigned to work on something, because there's so many possibilities involved. Like, how easy to learn is this code base? How impactful is this project? Will I like working on this type of feature they have an open issue about? And I guess my first tip here is to try not to get lost in the ocean of choices. Yes, it can be jarring to choose a way forward, and that's exactly why we shouldn't spend too much time on it. It's not like it's a irreversible choice. Just pick a repo, have a go at it, try it for an amount of time, and if it's not a fit, just try again. Like, at least you're going to get out of it having read some code, and that knowledge is never useless. If you have professional experience as a developer, I'm pretty sure that you've used some open source tool at some point in your career. And this can be a great way to start. Like, try to recollect some of the tools that you've used and found useful in the past, and just explore them. Like, this is especially interesting if you've had a good chunk of experience with the tool, because as an experienced user, you can skip through the part of open source that is learning about the tool you're going to contribute to. There's this term in the industry called dogfooding, which is basically using the product to develop. And this is super important to not only get a good hang of what you contribute to, but also put yourself in user shoes so you make sensible feature and usability decisions. You're inevitably going to have to dogfood in open source. So if you're already familiar with the tool, that's one less thing to do. So after choosing the repo you want to contribute to, there are some important steps that you need to take beyond reading the code. First, if there are any chat communities, join them. Discord is often the most popular one, and depending on the community, it may be the only way to get questions answered and receive feedback on your work. After these simple steps, we're ready to move on to the practical tips on contributing. So navigating repositories can be challenging if you've never done it before. There are things to be considered when you choose a repo to contribute to, like whether it's still active or not, the amount of issues, if the maintainers are easily reachable, etc. Apart from that, there's the whole part that is understanding the code itself. There's huge buzz around vibe coding right now. I've vibe coded systems myself. It's very fast. You get to review work instead of writing, and there's a lot of time that can be saved, especially in fairly manual and toily tasks. However, if you're early in your contribution journey or if you're more on the junior side, AI can get in your way at times. And I actually recommend it using with moderation so you can grasp the basics and not just become an AI operator. But one great use of AI that I always use it for is explaining code bases, behaviors, and so on. My tool of choice is Cursor, but I know that Copilot, which is free for students, also does this. You can select pieces of codes, files, etc. Pass the whole context of your code base, and the AI will become a great colleague to you. And this is especially helpful in open source because there's often a years old code base to catch up on, and also to grasp context on. And you want to get started with coding, right? So I definitely recommend you use AI for that. Now that you've somewhat understand the code base, it's now time to find good issues to start contributing. Most repos will track their issues in the Issues tab. However, there are instances where the issues are tracked elsewhere, which is the case for Django, for example. So try to find where the issues are tracked and try to identify if there are any labeling systems available. It's common that repo maintainers use labels to categorize their issues. For example, good first issue, easy pickings, needs design decision, bug, etc. And of course, the most obvious tip I could give you would be to start with the good first issue or easy pickings tickets. But most of the time, there aren't many, and the ones that exist are often allocated to someone already. As Carlton Gibson said in his 2019 DjangoCon Europe talk about contributing to Django, these things aren't binary. It's not like they're only easy or hard tickets. We will find that there are quite a few that are very much in between and that will require some thought and dedication, but that are definitely achievable. And there's one more consideration that I'd like to point out. I think that one of the best ways to start contributing and understanding a code base in a practical way is starting with bug fixes. Although this is not a rule, a lot of projects will have templates for bug reporting that will contain useful information about the issue to be resolved. A lot of them will contain details like expected behavior, actual behavior, screenshots, environment the user was in when the error occurred, lots of context for you to get started in a resolution. And bug fixes allow you to deeply understand the behavior of a feature and adjacent parts of the system before you get to dive into more complex problems. Of course, there will be weirdly complex bugs too, but you will find that in healthy code bases, they won't be the majority. Before even trying to solve any issues, one needs to be mindful of understanding the contribution rules for the projects they're trying to work on. Some projects will be very explicit about that with contributing files, documentation for contributors, coding guidelines and styles, PR templates, etc. Others won't be so obvious about that. In any case, always start by looking out for these sorts of rules before actually opening up a PR and asking people to review it. If this isn't documented, reach out for the community, ask questions. These Discord spaces often have channels dedicated to answering questions, so it should be fairly easy to get clarity on project standards in most cases. And in case the project doesn't have a standard, you can still keep your work organized by yourself. There are some general guidelines you can follow, but of course, they will vary greatly from case to case. So instead of dictating comprehensive rules, I'll try to bring light to what I use personally. While there are repos that don't require code changes to necessarily contain tests, I think that every developer should be concerned about releasing untested code anywhere. For that reason, I'm a great advocate for test-driven development. Test-driven development is a practice in which you write automated tests before implementing the code. So first, your tests are going to fail, and you keep running them while you implement the code until all of them pass. And this practice is great because it forces you to think about edge cases before you even start implementing your code. And then at the end, you're going to have a really good coverage for it. So if you're starting out with bugs, for example, TDD can be a great ally in validating that the issue is in fact happening, and then also validating that the issue has been resolved by your code. I personally love when I go read code and find useful comments in there. But this one is a sensitive issue. There are people who think that code should be so simple that you don't need any comments to understand it. And yes, I get that point, but in real life, there are times when we cannot run from inherent complexity. So not accidental complexity, but inherent. So code comments can be useful to readers when they help understand chains of behaviors, edge cases, and contexts. So whenever I'm developing for open source, I try to use them to close understanding gaps in the code. Of course, use it with parsimony, but there are tons of benefits that come from using, doc strings in Python, for example, like easily generating API docs, right? Documenting your code is important for developers who are going to build on top of it, but documenting behaviors and features are just as important to guarantee that your users are well informed about what they do. So I think that no significant PRs should be merged without updates to the project's docs. And here's where AI can be a great helper too. Like, try asking it to look at the current docs, look at your code changes, and then generate new or updated docs. Of course, you need to review it to make sure that you're not releasing incorrect content, but it works pretty well. And if you prefer going the classic way, I recommend that you get acquainted with the project docs to understand structure, writing style, where your feature fits best. And, if you're unsure, ask maintainers. Some repos also ask that contributors include their changes in the next version's release notes. Some repos have this automated, so it's important to check the case for the repo you're contributing to. So just make sure you check with maintainers before doing anything. And speaking of checking with maintainers, there's certain etiquette that you should follow when communicating with them. Even if you see that there's like a main maintainer, try not to overload them with questions or just rely on them. Unless they tell you it's okay, it's good to refrain from messaging them directly about project concerns, for example. This is not a written rule, but it's good practice, because if you direct your communications to the public channel, the chances of you getting your questions answered quicker and the maintainers not being overwhelmed are higher. Of course, if you want, you can set very clear expectations with them, like asking them how they prefer to communicate, for example. But if you don't want to validate these things up front, it's good to follow this common sense advice. And when writing questions, asking for PR reviews, etc., it's also good practice to try and include as much context as you can in your message, and even include a short summary of it first so people can quickly get what you mean. This is a skill that may need to be developed for some of you. So whenever one of the people I lead have difficulty with this sort of contextual and objective communication, I usually direct them to use AI like ChatGPT. So here's a good starter prompt to get as much context in your message as possible. You can modify it however you like, but the gist of it is that the AI will ask you questions until it has enough information to write the message for you. After doing everything right and opening your PR, be prepared to wait. Open source can be slow. Most folks are doing it for free, and it's hard to balance everything. Like, we have families, work, friends, and several other concerns to attend to. And I guess that excitement can make us a little unaware of that when we start. So adjusting expectations is essential here. Don't think that folks are necessarily going to review your work within the first day or two. Instead, prepare yourself for weekly feedback before pinging people for reviews. It can be a little discouraging when you're really excited to get going and merge your work, but instead try to focus on other things and enjoy the process. Finally, enjoy the feeling. Contributing to open source is extremely fulfilling, and the community feeling you get is great. The people you meet are awesome, and the feeling of working on something bigger that helps others is quite rewarding. If you're interested in starting in open source and would like some guidance, please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I know some people who could use help. And if you'd like to go your own way, here are some of the references that helped me build this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amanda, for such an insightful talk. I bet it's been very insightful for everyone. I've also learned a lesson or two. It's been wonderful listening to you. If anyone is looking to start contributing to open source, either as a maintainer or as a senior software engineer or even a junior software engineer, this is the right time for you to get started with contributing and also participating in open source software contributions. Thank you once again, Amanda, and thank you everyone for listening. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.